Chapter 1. On the day Olivia Fordham was diagnosed with stomach cancer, her husband, Ethan Miller, was taking care of his first love's children. In the hospital corridor, Keith Rogers said grimly while holding a biopsy report, "Olivia, the results are out. If the surgery is successful, the 5-year survival rate for a 3A malignant tumor is 15 to 30%. Olivia gripped the strap of her sling bag tightly with her slender fingers. Her petite face was pale and solemn. "Keith, how long do I have left to live if I don't do the surgery?" 6 months to a year. It's different for everyone. In your case, it's better to do 2 rounds of chemotherapy first before the surgery. It will prevent the risk of the tumor spreading or undergoing metastasis. Olivia bit her lip while forcing out, "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'll arrange for you to be admitted to the hospital right away," said Keith. "There's no need. I don't plan to receive treatment. I won't be able to get through it," Olivia said. Keith wanted to say something more, but Olivia tipped her head at him. "Keith, please help me keep this a secret. I don't want my family to worry." The Fordham family was bankrupt. Olivia already had to bend over backward just to cover the medical expenses of her father, Jeff Fordham. If her family knew about her illness, it would undoubtedly make the situation worse. Keith sighed helplessly and said, "Don't worry. I'll keep my lips sealed. I heard that you're married. Your husband. Keith, please take good care of my dad. I have to go now." Olivia seemed very reluctant to talk about this and left quickly before he could answer. Keith shook his head. Rumor had it that she had dropped out of university and gotten married. The top genius in medical school had fallen from grace into devastation. Throughout the 2 years of her father's treatment, she was the only one who took care of everything. Even when she had collapsed from illness and was sent to the hospital by passers-by, her husband had never shown up. Thinking back, Ethan had truly treated her well in the year they had gotten married. Alas, when his first love returned to the country pregnant, everything changed. There was once when Olivia, who was also pregnant, fell into the water with Marina Carlton, his first love. Amidst her struggles, she saw him swimming toward Marina with all his might. Due to the ordeal, she and Marina both went into labor prematurely. Olivia had been rescued too late and missed the optimal window for receiving treatment. By the time she arrived at the hospital, her baby had died in the womb. 7 days after the death of her baby, Ethan asked for a divorce, but she had not agreed to it. Now that she knew about her illness, she could not deny it any longer. She dialed his number with shaking hands, and he picked up after the 3rd ring. He said coldly, "I won't see you unless it's to get divorced." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she forced herself to swallow her words about her illness. Marina's voice suddenly came over the phone in the background. "Ethan, it's time for the pediatric checkup." The tears that Olivia had held back for a long time flowed down her face that instant. Her child was gone and her family was ruined, but he now had a family with someone else. It was time for all this to be over. She no longer begged him like before. Instead, she said weakly, "Ethan, let's get a divorce." Ethan was obviously stunned for a moment over the phone. He laughed coldly and said, "Olivia, what tricks are you playing this time?" Olivia closed her eyes and said, "I'll wait for you at home." It took all of her strength to hang up on him, and she slid to the ground against the wall. The rain blowing into the corridor drenched her as she gripped her phone and bit her sleeve while crying soundlessly. Ethan stared at his phone blankly after she hung up on him abruptly. After a year of the silent treatment where she refused to divorce no matter what, why had she suddenly changed her mind today? Her voice sounded tearful as well. Gazing out at the heavy rain, Ethan walked out of the ward. "Ethan, where are you going?" asked Marina while chasing after him with the baby in her arms. When she saw him walking away quickly, her gentle expression immediately grew frighteningly dark. Olivia, that bitch, she still wouldn't give up. It had been a long time since Ethan had last stepped into the house they shared during their marriage. He had expected to see the dining table laden with his favorite dishes prepared by Olivia, but the villa was dark and empty. The sky always darkened too early during autumn. Night had fallen although it was only 6 p.m. Ethan spotted a vase of wilted flowers on the dining table. Knowing Olivia, She wouldn't leave wilted flowers sitting on the table, so there was only one possible explanation. She hadn't been home recently and had most likely been taking care of her father at the hospital. When Olivia opened the door, she saw a tall man standing by the dining table in a suit. The expression on his handsome face was as cold as ice and his dark eyes were filled with deep hatred. Olivia was soaked from the run from the car to the house in the rain. When his icy gaze fell on her, a chill went down her spine. "Where were you?" Ethan asked frigidly. Olivia's eyes, which always gleamed in the past, were dull at that moment. She looked at him indifferently and said, "Since when did you care about me?" Ethan sneered and said, "You won't be able to sign the papers if something happened to you." His words stabbed her heart like sharp needles. She dragged her feet forward, dripping wet. She did not cry or make a fuss but calmly pulled out the documents from an envelope. "Don't worry, I've already signed them," she said. She put the document on the dining table, and Ethan realized that he had never found the word, divorce, so displeasing in his life. Olivia only had one request, which was an alimony of $10 million. "I was wondering why you would suddenly agree to divorce. Turns out it's for money," he mocked. His scornful expression filled her vision. The old Olivia would have defended herself, but she was just too exhausted now. So, she only stood where she was and said softly, "By right, I could have taken half of your net worth, Mr. Miller. But I only asked you for $10 million. When it comes down to it, I'm still being benevolent." Ethan stepped forward, casting a long shadow over Olivia. He held her chin with his slender fingers and said in a deep, cold voice, "What did you call me?" "Mr. Miller, if you don't like this form of address, then I don't mind referring to you as my ex-husband. You can leave after signing the papers." Her arrogant expression displeased Ethan. "This is my house. Who gave you the right to ask me to leave?" he said. Olivia smirked and said, "Indeed, I do not have the right. Don't worry, Mr. Miller. I will move out after receiving the divorce certificate." With that, she slapped his hand away and looked him right in the eye. She said icily, "Mr. Miller, bring your documents to the City Hall at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll see you there." Chapter 2. In the dark of night, Olivia stood alone in the bathroom. The hot water chased away her chills. She rubbed her swollen red eyes and walked to a room. When she opened the door, a warmly furnished children's room lay before her. She pressed a button lightly, and mellow music from a music box filled the room. The room was lit with yellow lights. The atmosphere was undoubtedly homely, but Olivia wept unstoppably. God must have decided to take her life because she had failed to save her babies. She climbed onto the cot that was barely more than 3 feet long and curled up into a fetal position. Tears from her left eye flowed to her right eye, down to her cheek, then finally wet the children's blanket she was lying on. She hugged a plushie tightly while murmuring, "Sorry, my baby. It's all my fault. I failed to protect you. Don't be afraid. I'll be with you soon." After losing her baby, her mental health had deteriorated. Olivia was like a pretty flower slowly wilting away. She gazed out into the night, thinking as long as she could leave her father that sum of money, then she could go and be with her baby. Before dawn the next morning, Olivia was already fully dressed as she looked down at her own smiling face in the photo they'd taken outside the city hall after they registered their marriage. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed since then. She prepared a breakfast that was good for the stomach. Although she didn't have much time left to live, she wanted to live longer to take care of her father. As Olivia was about to leave the house, she received a call from the hospital. "Miss Fordham, Mr. Fordham had a heart attack. We've already sent him into the emergency ward. I'll be there right away." Olivia rushed to the hospital, but the surgery was still ongoing. She waited outside the operating theater with her hands clasped. She had already lost everything. Her only hope was for her father to live on in good health. A nurse handed her a receipt. "Miss Fordham, this is the total bill for your father's emergency treatment and surgery." Olivia scanned through the details and found that the total bill amounted to more than $100,000. Jeff's daily treatment expenses already cost $50,000 per month, and she only barely managed to make ends meet by working 3 jobs. After paying off his hospitalization fees earlier, she only had $5,000 left in her card. How was she going to afford his surgery? She had no choice but to call Ethan. He answered in a cold voice, "Where are you? I've already been waiting for 30 minutes. Something urgent came up, and I can't make it." "Olivia, is this funny to you?" Ethan sneered in response. "I was thinking why you would change your mind all of a sudden. Do you take me for a fool, making up lies like this?" He actually thought she was lying. Olivia explained, "I'm not lying. I was reluctant before this because I thought you must have had your reasons for treating me this way, but I see things clearly now. There's no point to a marriage like this, so I'm getting this divorce willingly. I couldn't make it because my father had a heart attack and had to undergo surgery. Is he dead?" Ethan interrupted. It sounded weird to Olivia. Who even spoke like that? "No, the doctors are treating him." "Ethan, the surgery costs more than $100,000. Can you give me that $10 million? I promise I'll get the divorce." He responded with a snort. "Olivia, I hope you know that I, of all people, wish your father dead. I can give you the money, but only after we make the divorce official." The line went dead after that. Olivia's face was filled with disbelief. She remembered that Ethan had treated Jeff with respect when they were still together. However, the hatred in his voice earlier did not sound like a joke at all. Why did he want her father dead? Everything made sense when she connected the dots with the Fordham family going bankrupt 2 years ago. How could there have been such a coincidence? Ethan must have caused their bankruptcy, but how had her family offended him? Olivia had no time to dwell on it. The most urgent matter at hand was to gather $100,000 to pay her father's medical bills. The doors to the operating theater opened, and Olivia quickly stepped forward. "Dr. Herbert, how is my father?" "Don't worry, Miss Fordham. Mr. Fordham made it, but he's still mentally fragile. Be careful not to trigger him in the meantime." "I understand," Olivia replied. "Thank you, Dr. Herbert." As Jeff was still unconscious, Olivia asked the nurse, "My father was quite healthy. Why did he suddenly have a heart attack?" The nurse answered hastily, "Mr. Fordham has been in good spirits recently. He even said that he craved lamb shank. I thought that Al Palfino was just 15 minutes away, so I went to buy him mushroom soup. When I came back, he had already been sent to the emergency ward. It's all my fault, Miss Fordham. Did you see anyone before you left my dad?" "No, Mr. Fordham looked normal before I left. He even said that you liked the carrot cake from Al Palfino and asked me to buy a slice. I never thought that this would happen." Olivia felt that things weren't that simple. After asking the nurse to take good care of her father, she rushed to the admission desk to check the visitor records. "Miss Fordham, nobody came to visit Mr. Fordham this morning," the nurse working at the desk replied. "Thank you. By the way, have you cleared the bill for Mr. Fordham?" Olivia did her best to hide her embarrassment as she replied, "I'll pay immediately." "I'm so sorry." She left the admission desk and took a taxi to the city hall, but Ethan was nowhere to be seen when she got there. Olivia called him in a panic and said, "I've reached the city hall." "Where are you?" "My office." "Ethan, can you come and settle the divorce procedures now?" Ethan sniggered and said, "Which do you think is more important? The business deal worth hundreds of millions that I'm about to make, or you? I can wait till you're done." "Ethan, I'm begging you. I need that money urgently for my father. If he dies, I'll pay for his funeral." With that, he hung up. When Olivia called him again, she realized that he had switched his phone off. The heavy rain beat down on her, and she couldn't breathe as she crouched under the bus stop sign. Olivia felt nothing but regret as she gazed at the busy street. If she hadn't gotten pregnant and dropped out of university, then she would have graduated with a degree by then. With her capabilities and academic talent, she would have had a very bright future. Who could have guessed that the Fordham family's sudden bankruptcy would cause Ethan, who had always loved her dearly, to change? She had lost everything in the blink of an eye. 1 year ago, Ethan had asked someone to take away all her jewelry and luxury handbags. The only valuable item she had left was her wedding ring. She took it off and walked into a high-class jewelry shop resolutely. The salesperson eyed Olivia, who was drenched and dressed in cheap clothes, up and down for a moment. She then asked, "Hi, did you bring the invoice and proof of purchase?" "Yes." Olivia pretended she hadn't noticed the salesperson's judgmental stare and hurriedly handed the invoice with her head lowered. "Thank you, miss. We have to send the ring to be verified. Can I contact you tomorrow?" Olivia licked her dry lips and said in an urgent tone, "I'm in urgent need of money. Can you speed it up?" "Okay, I'll try. Please give me a moment." Before the salesperson could take the ring away, a fair hand clamped down on the box. "This ring is very pretty. I'll buy it." When Olivia looked up, she found herself face to face with the person she hated the most, Marina. Chapter 3. Marina wore a white cashmere coat. Her white pearl earrings made her look gentle and charismatic. Just the shawl around her neck was already worth more than $1,000. The salesperson went up to her and greeted her at once. "Mrs. Miller, is Mr. Miller not here today to pick out jewelry with you? There are some new arrivals. Each one of them would suit you great, Mrs. Miller. The emerald piece you asked me to reserve for you is here. Try it on later. I'm sure it would suit your complexion very well." The salesperson punctuated almost every sentence with, "Mrs. Miller," just to butter Marina up even though she and Ethan weren't legally married yet. Marina looked at Olivia with a smile and a proud look in her eyes that showed off her victory. Everyone knew that Ethan treated her like the most precious treasure, but they did not know that Olivia was his legally married wife. Olivia clenched her hands into fists. Why did she have to bump into the person she least wanted to see in her most embarrassing moment? Marina said mildly, "You'll lose a lot of money trading in a good quality ring like that." Olivia reached out and snatched the box away with a steely expression. "I'm not selling it anymore," she said. "No. What a real shame. I like that ring pretty much. I was even planning to offer you a higher price for it since we know each other. Weren't you in a rush for money, Miss Fordham?" Olivia's hands stiffened. Yes, she was in need of money, very desperately too. That was why Marina was insulting her so relentlessly. The salesperson advised her, "Miss, this is the fiancé of the Miller Group's president. You're very lucky that your ring struck her fancy. She'll surely pay you a good price for it, and you won't have to wait for us to complete the procedures before you get your money." It sounded like mockery to Olivia when the salesperson kept mentioning, Mrs. Miller. A year ago, she had told Marina confidently that she would never divorce Ethan and asked her to give up. In just a year, everybody, high and low, knew who she was. Olivia felt more and more convinced that her marriage with Ethan was nothing but a scheme. Noticing her hesitation, Marina smiled brightly and said, "Miss Fordham, why don't you name a price?" That bitch's cocky expression disgusted Olivia. She said coldly, "I'm not selling it anymore." However, Marina wouldn't let it go. "Miss Fordham, you're already at the end of your rope. Don't tell me that you still care about dignity. If I were you, I would sell it immediately. Has no one ever told you that stubbornness isn't a good look on you? What a joke, Miss Carlton. Robbing other people of their things has made you think you really own them. Why don't you go and rob a bank?" While they were fighting, the ring flew out of the box in a graceful arc and fell to the floor with a soft clink. Olivia immediately rushed toward it, but the ring rolled to a stop by a pair of elegant leather shoes by the door. When Olivia bent down to pick it up, a drop of water dripped onto the back of her neck and sent chills through her. She looked up slowly into a pair of cold, emotionless eyes. Ethan was still holding an open umbrella, and droplets of water dripped from it onto her head. The black wool coat he was wearing complemented his figure and made him look stylish. Olivia stared at him blankly and recalled the first time she had seen him. 20-year-old Ethan had been wearing a white shirt as he stood on the sunbathed field, but it was as if he had been standing right inside her heart. That image was branded in her mind ever since she was 14. Now, she was wearing a sweater that made her look even skinnier with its fuzzy material. Her chin was sharp, and she looked thinner than she was. 3 months ago, he looked grand and unparalleled, while she looked miserable and pathetic. Olivia's hand, which was about to pick up the ring, stopped in midair. While she was in a daze, Ethan expressionlessly raised his foot and stepped on the ring on his way past her. Olivia remained crouched. That ring had been designed according to his taste. Its design wasn't exaggerated, but it had a unique style. There was only one ring like that in the whole world. After he had put it on her, Olivia had never taken it off except when she was showering. If it wasn't because she was really in desperate need of money this time, she wouldn't have gone to such measures. However, what was a treasure in her eyes was just worthless rubbish to him. He hadn't just stepped on the ring, but also the past that she treated so preciously. Marina smiled and went to him while explaining, "Ethan, you're here. I just happened to be picking out jewelry when I saw Miss Fordham selling her ring." Ethan's cold expression betrayed no emotions. His icy gaze rested on Olivia while she tried her best to suppress her fury. He then asked, "You want to sell that ring?" Olivia held back her tears and bit her lip to stop herself from crying. "Yes. Would you like to buy it, Mr. Miller?" Ethan smirked mockingly and said, "I remember you telling me how important that ring is to you. I can see how sincere you were now. Anything that is disregarded by someone else is worthless to me." As Olivia was about to answer, she felt a burning pain in her stomach. As the tumor grew, the pain went from a slight ache to a piercing pain. She looked at the couple, who looked like a match made in heaven in their matching black and white coats under the bright lights. She suddenly lost the strength to explain herself. A man whose feelings had changed wouldn't be bothered even if she gave him her heart. Olivia fought against the pain and picked up the ring. Then, she slowly walked back to the counter to retrieve the box and certificate. She didn't want to show weakness in front of Ethan. Although the pain was enough to make her pass out, she still maintained a steady gait. When she walked past him, she said mildly, "Just like you, I treated it like a treasure last time, but now, it's just a piece of metal I can exchange for money." Ethan felt that something was off with her. Her forehead was beaded with sweat, and her face was as white as a sheet. She looked like she was trying her best to fight against some sort of pain. Suddenly, he gripped her arm and said in a low voice, "What's wrong?" Olivia shook off his hand and said, "It has nothing to do with you." She did not spare him another glance and did her best to keep her back straight as she disappeared from his sight. Ethan watched her leave. He had been the one to let her go, but why did his heart still ache? Olivia went to a deserted corner and dug her painkillers out of her bag in a fluster. She knew that all the treatments and cancer medicine had side effects, so she only bought some painkillers and regular stomach medicine, which was better than nothing. Gazing out at the heavy rain, she thought, "Is that the only choice I have left?" That was the last person she wanted to meet, but she had no choice but to take a gamble for her father's sake. Olivia went home to clean herself up before taking a taxi to Hawthorne Villa. When she had returned to the country more than a year ago, that person had called Olivia once. They hadn't met in more than 10 years, and Olivia had no idea how she was doing. Judging by the grand villa, Olivia guessed that she had been doing pretty well. After stating the purpose of her visit, a maid led Olivia into the living room, where a graceful woman was sitting. She was as beautiful as Olivia remembered her to be. "Liv," said the woman as she looked at Olivia with her pretty eyes. However, Olivia couldn't bring herself to call her Mom. Chapter 4. Chloe Parker had left when Olivia was 8. It was Jeff's birthday, and Olivia had been in high spirits, eager to return home and celebrate her father's birthday with her family. She never knew that what awaited her was her parents' divorce. Olivia had chased after her mother, scrambling down the stairs and falling. She did not even realize that she had lost her shoes. All she cared about was clinging onto her mother's legs and crying, "Mom, don't go." The graceful woman bent down, stroked Olivia's cheeks, and said, "I'm sorry. Mom, I'm first in my grade. You haven't seen my test papers yet. You have to sign them. Don't leave me, Mom. I'll be a good girl. I promise I won't go to any more fun fairs. I won't make you mad. I'll listen to you, please." Hastily, young Olivia blubbered everything she could think of in hopes of making Chloe stay. In the end, Chloe simply told Olivia that her marriage with Olivia's father was not a happy one and that she had found her true happiness elsewhere. Later, Olivia watched as a man she had never met helped Chloe place her luggage in a car, and they both left while holding each other's hands. She chased after their car for a mile without wearing any shoes before crashing heavily onto the ground. Her feet and knees were scraped, and they bled as she stared at the gradually diminishing outline of the car that she could never reach. At that time, she could not understand what had happened. Now that she was grown up, she knew that it was because her mother had been caught cheating on her father and simply decided to file for a divorce, leaving him with everything, including Olivia herself. Chloe had never contacted Olivia, and the latter hated her with every fiber of her being. She even hoped that she would never have to meet Chloe again. However, fate worked in mysterious ways, and Olivia could do nothing to stop it. Her throat went dry and her feet turned to lead. Chloe knew what was on her daughter's mind. She approached Olivia and pulled her to sit beside her. "I know you hate me. You were very young back then. Lots of things weren't as simple as they seemed, so I wasn't able to explain them to you." She caressed Olivia's cheeks and continued, "Look at you, all grown up now. Liv, now that I'm back, I'll be staying here permanently. I know something's happened to the Fordham family. It doesn't matter, though, because I'll take care of you." It was then that Olivia knew the so-called hatred she harbored toward her mother was not worth mentioning at all. Her voice cracked as she called out, "Mom. My dear, since you're here already, you should stay and have dinner. Chris has taken good care of me for the past few years. He has a daughter who's older than you by 2 years. She's coming over with her fiancé for dinner. I'll introduce you to her later." However, it was not in Olivia's plans to make herself part of Chloe's new family. She hastily interrupted her. "Mom, I'm here this time for my dad. My family's bankrupt now, and Dad just had a heart attack, but I don't have the money to pay for his surgery. Can you help me? I promise I'll return the money to you." Chloe had not yet replied when they heard a familiar voice. "Miss Fordham, you truly are short of money, aren't you? Going so far as to come to my house for it?" It was like a slap to the face. Olivia looked incredulously over at the people standing by the door. Who else could it be except Marina and Ethan? Apparently, fate was toying around with her again. She never thought that her very own mother would be Marina's stepmother. Olivia's husband and mother were now Marina's family. To make things worse, those two had caught her in the act of asking her mother for money. Ethan noticed her uneasiness, but he remained calm and indifferent toward her. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced through the awkwardness in the air. Olivia noticed a maid pushing in a twin stroller. The moment the baby's cries started, Ethan was already picking up and soothing one of them skillfully. They formed an eye-catching picture of a happy family of 4. Olivia's child would have been this age too if it were alive. She started regretting coming here. She felt as if she was being embarrassed and humiliated over and over again. Strangely, one of the babies could not stop crying today. The maid rushed to prepare the milk, yet the cries worsened instead. Patiently, Ethan continued soothing the baby. "Be good, and don't cry." The sight of a tall man like him holding a baby gently in his arms was heartwarming. Seeing this patient and gentle side of him, Olivia suddenly had a thought. In just a few strides, she approached him and picked up the child. Somehow, Ethan did not stop her from doing so. Even more strangely, the child stopped crying and started to smile the moment Olivia held it in her arms. The corner of its lips curved into a smile, and its eyes twinkled as it looked at her. The child then started chuckling and mumbling, "Amma." Its tiny hands reached up in an attempt to grab the fluffy ball-like ornament on her cap. The child was all smiles, which was the exact opposite of Ethan. It was like a blade had ruthlessly stabbed into her heart, and it was the last straw for her, crushing any bit of persistence left in her. She once thought that Ethan truly loved her. He had been kind to her during their first year of marriage. She could still remember him whispering to her, "Liv, let's have a baby." How could she refuse him then? Even though she had not completed her studies, she did not hesitate to conceive a child. Only now did she realize that for all the time he spent with her, he did the same with another woman every time he went abroad for business. Nausea overtook Olivia. She returned the baby to Ethan and darted into the toilet. Then, she locked the door behind her. She did not eat much today. When she puked, all that came out was a mixture of her blood and the medications she took. Crimson liquid filled her sight, and tears started flowing down her cheeks. Great, just great, she thought. Her marriage had been a joke all along. Everything had an explanation now. It turned out that everything had been planned from the beginning. So, this was the reason he chose to save Marina instead of her when they both fell into the water that day. It also explained why he accompanied Marina when they both went into premature labor. It was because the children in her womb were his. After quite some time, Olivia heard a knock on the door. "Liv, are you all right?" It was Chloe. Olivia cleaned up the mess, splashed her face with water, and stumbled out of the washroom. Chloe was unaware of the events between them. She asked Olivia, "Are you sick?" "I just feel sick looking at those two. I feel much better now that I've vomited." "Do you know Marina? She's always been abroad. Is there some kind of misunderstanding between you two?" "This is Ethan." "I know." Olivia interrupted her, her voice cold as ice. "Ethan Miller, the president of Miller Group. Who in this world wouldn't know him?" "Yes. He's a brilliant and accomplished young man." "Indeed. He hasn't even divorced yet, but he's already eager to remarry. Ordinary people wouldn't be as bold as him." This left Chloe rather confused. "What are you talking about? He isn't married, so why would he get a divorce?" The smile on Olivia's face did not reach her eyes. In a mocking tone, she said, "Who am I then, if he isn't married?" "Mr. Miller, why don't you tell my mom just who I am?" Chapter 5. Chloe looked at Ethan with a puzzled gaze. She never knew that he was married. "Mr. Miller, we stayed overseas for many years and are unaware of what goes on here. What does my daughter have to do with you?" Ethan's eyes were calm. His expression remained indifferent as he said, "Even if there was something between us, it's already in the past. I'm settling my divorce soon." Olivia never thought that he would take things so lightly after all their years of marriage. She had given him her heart, yet this was all she got in the end. Needless to say, she was furious at him. However, she felt more disappointed than anything else. It was the disappointment of finding out just how blind she had been to treat trash like him like something precious. Olivia took out the ring box and hurled it at Ethan's face. "Fuck you, you scumbag. My deepest regret is marrying you. See you at the city hall tomorrow. Whoever fails to show up is a coward." The box hit him squarely on his forehead, leaving a trail of blood dripping down his face. It opened and fell together with the ring onto the ground. This time, Olivia did not look back. She stepped on the ring as she left and slammed the door shut. Too many things had happened over the past 2 years, and this was the final straw. She did not manage to go far before passing out by the roadside. It started pouring from the sky as if the world itself loathed her. Olivia thought that it would be better to just die like this. For her, there was nothing worth remembering in a world full of schemes and lies like this. When she woke up, she was lying in an unfamiliar room. The dull, yellowish light from a lamp chased away the darkness in the room. The warmth here was like a soothing breeze in spring. "You're awake." Olivia's eyes fluttered open to see Keith's eyes staring back at hers. "You saved me. I was on my way home when I saw you passed out by the roadside, so I brought you back. You were thoroughly soaked, so I had the maid help you change," Keith said, his eyes clear and sincere. "Thank you, Keith," Olivia thanked him. "I made oatmeal. You should have some warm water first," Keith told her. Olivia removed the blankets and started to get off the bed. "No need. It's late, and I don't want to trouble you." She was frail. The moment her feet touched the floor, her body tilted forward helplessly, making her fall to the ground. Hurriedly, Keith rushed to her aid by supporting her with his arms. Olivia could smell the light fragrance from his clothes. It was similar to the laundry detergent she used at home. Ethan also had the same scent back then. She could not help but feel her heart break when she thought of him. "You're too frail right now. Stop pushing yourself if you want to live for a couple more days," Keith warned her, yet his tone was gentle. "Think of it as you're doing this for your father." Only then did her dull and dispirited eyes flicker with a sliver of hope. "Sorry to trouble you." She watched as Keith busied himself in the kitchen. In truth, she and him were not that close. At most, he had given her a reward when she was nominated as the best student in her freshman year. That time, he was her senior by 4 years and had been doing his internship at a prestigious school elsewhere, so he did not spend much time in college. Later, she met him again in the hospital, and they started contacting each other more frequently. Still, their relationship was not close enough for her to always impose on him. After finishing her meal and taking some medication, her stomach finally settled. Keith then brought up the issue of her chemotherapy. Medicine nowadays is advanced, and you're only in the middle of the late stage of cancer. Even some patients in the final stage survived, so you must have faith in yourself. Chemotherapy is a highly effective treatment. Olivia lowered her head. I've studied medicine before. I know its pros and cons. Keith continued giving her advice. The chances of remission after that are high. Even if the side effects are severe, you can do it with some determination. Olivia raised her head to look at him with tears in her eyes. She was spending every ounce of her strength to force back her tears as she muttered with trembling lips, "But I can't do this anymore." Keith wanted to console her, but the words were now stuck in his throat. He stared at her red-rimmed eyes and felt himself die a little inside. After a while, he asked, "Is there truly no one else in this world that you care about anymore?" Startled, Olivia took some time before replying, "The only person I care about is my dad." "Then you should live even if it's only for him." Olivia smiled bitterly. "Thanks. I feel much better now. I'll be leaving." It was then that Keith realized that the ring on her finger she had always cherished was missing. He started to speak but swallowed back the words. Eventually, he asked, "Where are you going?" "I'll drive you there." "No, thanks. I've called a cab. It's coming soon." She refused his help so swiftly that he could do nothing but go along with it. Still, he thought that he should still be concerned. Her face was full of sorrow when they talked just now. He was worried that she would end her life, so he tailed the cab she took. The cab drove and stopped beside a river. Olivia stood alone and stared at the water. Even though it had stopped raining, the weather was still cold. Keith wanted to stop her from doing anything rash, but he saw a black MPV stop beside her. The car door opened, and out came the person whose face was always seen in finance magazines. Keith was shocked. Could that man be Olivia's husband? The wind tousled Olivia's hair, highlighting the agony on her already pale face. Ethan subconsciously wanted to raise his hand and tuck the strand of hair behind her ear. However, he quickly retracted it and asked, "What is it?" Olivia glanced over at him, her eyes cool and indifferent. She looked as if she wanted to make sure that the person standing before her was indeed him. "Were you behind my family's bankruptcy?" she asked. She did not beat around the bush, so he too went straight to the point and answered, "Yes." "Are the children yours?" This was her second question. She stared unblinkingly at him. She could have been overthinking things. However, it was never in his plans to deny this. "Yes," he said with his usual nonchalance. Olivia approached him and slapped him across the face. "Ethan Miller, you scumbag." He grabbed her wrist easily in one hand and brushed the tears on her cheeks with the other. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "You asshole, how could you treat me like this? What did my family do to deserve this?" The look on Ethan's face remained as calm and indifferent as ever when he spoke. "Why don't you ask your father about what he did?" Olivia swallowed before asking him. "Have you ever loved me, Ethan?" There was not even a ripple in his fathomless gaze. Slowly, he said, "Never. Since the beginning, you've always been nothing but a pawn." Her tears slid down her cheeks and fell onto the back of his hand. The breeze blew, taking away any lingering warmth that was left. "You hate me, don't you?" "Yes. This is what you Fordham owe me. You should blame yourself for being Jeff Fordham's daughter. I'll make you suffer every day to pay for what you've done to my little sister." "Didn't your sister go missing long ago? What does this have to do with my family?" He looked at her in disdain as if he were a ruler laying down judgment. "Did you know that my sister was being tormented while you were enjoying the affection of the people around you? Take a guess." "I won't tell you the truth. I want you to suffer and live a miserable life without ever knowing what happened. You'll get a taste of what my sister went through." Ethan got in his car after saying, "I'll be waiting at the city hall at 9 tomorrow." Olivia rushed over to his car and started hitting the car door. "Tell me, What happened to your sister? However, the driver slammed his foot on the accelerator, and the car zoomed out of sight, making her lose her balance and fall to the ground. Chapter 6. The wind blew bitingly cold on her face. Olivia was frozen to the core, but she pushed herself up and continued chasing after the car. She overestimated the current condition of her body and only ran for a couple of feet before crashing back to the ground. The car door opened. She saw a pair of shiny, tailored leather shoes halt before her. Slowly, she moved her sight from the shoes and up the trousers until she met Ethan's cold and unnerving gaze. "Ethan," Olivia muttered weakly. A pair of slender hands reached out to her. In a trance, Olivia thought she caught a glimpse of the young man she had fallen head over heels for all those years back. She could not help but stretch out her hands to him. Just as their hands touched, Ethan pulled back, extinguishing the light in her after giving her false hope and causing her to fall once more. She had not injured herself before this, but when she slipped this time, she cut her palms on the pieces of shattered glass on the ground. Blood started trickling down her palms to her arms. A shadow seemed to flit across Ethan's face, but he stayed motionless. Olivia was stunned. Back then, he would rush her to the hospital in the middle of the night even though she merely had a cut on her finger. She remembered the doctor chuckling and saying, "Thank goodness he brought you here in time. Otherwise, your wound would have healed on its own." The man before her and the one in her memories were the same person. He had the same eyes and face. Looking back, she realized that the concern he once showed for her was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a shade of icy indifference. In a cold voice, Ethan said, "Olivia, do you really think that I don't know you? You could easily run a mile and do a somersault. Do you expect me to believe you'd fall after running just a couple of steps?" He stared at her, the mockery in his eyes like a knife cutting through her. Olivia bit her lip and tried to explain. "It's not like that. I'm not lying to you. I'm just a little weak because I'm sick." Ethan did not wait for her to finish. He crouched and tilted her face upward to face him. His rough fingers brushed her dry, chapped lips. "You truly are your father's daughter. You two are pretentious to the extreme and would put on a stupid act just for some money." Those words stung more than the cold wind, and they stabbed at her heart repeatedly. She swatted his hand away from her face. "My father is an upright person. He would never do anything to harm anyone." Ethan sneered. He decided he no longer wanted to discuss this matter with Olivia and plucked a check from his wallet instead. He carelessly wrote on the check, held it in between two fingers, and placed it in front of Olivia. "Do you want this?" he asked. $5 million certainly was not a small amount. It would spare Olivia the headache of securing funds for her father's medical bills. However, she did not take the check because Ethan would not be so kind to her. "I have one condition, though," Ethan added and whispered in her ear. "This money is all yours if you repeat after me. Jeff Fordham's an asshole." The look on Olivia's face changed instantly, and her hand shot up in an attempt to slap him across the face. Ethan stopped her by grabbing her by the wrist, and as Olivia struggled against him, she left a bloody handprint on his shirt. Ethan's grip on her tightened, and his tone became harsher. "Oh, you don't want to do it. He'll have to die in the hospital then. I've already picked a burial spot for him anyway." Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she asked, "Why did you become like this?" The man who had once sworn an oath to protect her and cherish her for the rest of her life was long gone, replaced by a ruthless person who found joy in making her break down in tears. The dim light from the nearby lamppost illuminated his face, further emphasizing his annoyance and impatience. "So, you're not going to say it, right?" He released his grasp on her and slowly tore the check into pieces. Olivia rushed forth to stop him, but he shoved her away and told her in a tone devoid of emotions, "I've given you a chance." The paper shreds fell from his hands, just like the hope she had had for him. "No, don't." Clumsily, Olivia hurried to pick them up as her tears continued to flow. She looked like a child who had lost everything she valued, anxious and helpless. Ethan turned to leave, and just when he was about to get in his car, he heard a thud. He turned around to see her figure lying unconscious on the ground. Calvin, the driver, had an anxious look on his face as he asked, "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller's passed out." Should we send her to the hospital? Ethan's gaze was unsettling when he looked at Kelvin. Are you worried about her? Kelvin was confused. He had been working for Ethan for a long time. It was clear as day that Mr. Miller had been head over heels for Mrs. Miller in the past, but his entire personality seemed to change after going to identify his sister's corpse. Nevertheless, this was his employer's family matter, so he dared not probe further. He simply drove away. The car drove further and further away. Ethan looked at Olivia through the rearview mirror and found that she still had not gotten up. The look of disdain on his face deepened. Apparently, her acting had improved in just a few days. Despite letting her live a sheltered life, Jeff had Olivia participate in various fitness programs since she was young to prevent her from being a target of bullying. She had a black belt in Taekwondo and was an expert in self-defense. There was no way someone as fit and healthy as her would faint so often like this. To him, Olivia was putting on an act for money. As this thought crossed his mind, he averted his gaze from the rearview mirror, refusing to spare her another glance. Seeing Ethan's car gradually disappear, Keith finally came to Olivia's side. When Olivia awoke once again, she found herself in the room she had left not too long ago. A needle was stuck in the back of her hand, and the IV fluid slowly seeped into it. Her left hand was bandaged. She looked at the clock that hung on the wall and saw that it was already 3 in the morning. Before she could react, she heard Keith say in a gentle voice. Sorry, I followed you because I thought you would do something stupid. Seeing that Olivia wanted to sit up from the bed, Keith rushed to her aid by placing a pillow behind her. Then he gave her some water. She finally opened her mouth to speak. Did you witness everything? I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention. Keith was so earnest and sincere, while Ethan was the exact opposite of him. It's okay. I'm his wife. There's nothing to hide, anyway. Keith's expression seemed to freeze for a second. Olivia noticed it and smiled bitterly. Right. Everyone thinks Marina is his fiancée now. It doesn't matter if you don't believe, number. I believe you. I recognize the design of your wedding ring. It was an SL limited edition. That's the only pair that exists. The magazines mentioned that SL's boss designed it specially for his wife. And I know that Ethan Miller is the one behind SL. Back then, Keith suspected that Olivia and Ethan were together, but he dismissed the idea after hearing the gossip between Ethan and Marina. Ethan rarely came to the hospital after that too. Olivia subconsciously touched the place where she usually wore her ring. Her finger was bare now, and the skin where the ring had once been was a bit fairer than the rest of her hand, as if it was reminding her of her ridiculous marriage. It doesn't matter if I'm his wife. We're getting a divorce tomorrow at 9. Does he know about your condition? He doesn't have the right to know about it. Chapter 7. Olivia sounded unnaturally calm when she said this. It was as though she had thoroughly let go of Ethan. However, Keith knew that letting go of someone you once loved was not as simple as this. She was like an injured animal that would hide her wounds in front of others but tended to them when no one was around. Still, Keith did not probe further about it. He tried changing the subject. I know you haven't paid for your father's surgery. Since we're friends, I'll lend you some money for now. You can pay me back in the future. It was not a simple matter for Olivia to obtain such a large sum of money. He had offered help multiple times before this, but she always refused. Today was no different as Olivia shook her head and said, No, thanks. Olivia, your father's condition is serious. Would you rather be humiliated by that scumbag than accept my help? I have no conditions. I just want to help you. My family might not be as wealthy as the Millers, but this sum isn't much to me. So, don't worry about it. Olivia was holding a glass of water with both hands. He thought she looked pale to the extreme when she glanced over at him. It made him rather upset to see her in such a state. Keith, I know you're a good person, but there's no future for me anymore. Whether it was money or his kindness, she couldn't repay any of it. Noticing the fluid in the IV bag was almost finished, Olivia forcefully pulled the needle free from the back of her hand. Blood gushed out from the wound since there was no gauze to stop the bleeding. However, she did not seem like she cared. Picking up her jacket, she told him, You don't need to worry about the money. He'll give me $10 million when I divorce him. My father just had surgery yesterday. I'm going to visit him at the hospital. She was as stubborn as a mule, just as had been when she suddenly decided to give up her studies to marry despite being dubbed the college genius. Even her mentors would sigh in grief while talking about her when Keith joined them for meals. Olivia seemed to expect that Keith would suggest driving her to the hospital. Before he could say something, she was already gesturing to her phone and cutting off any chance of letting him speak. The cab is here. Olivia then put on her jacket. As she placed a hand on the doorknob, she heard him ask, "Olivia, did you ever regret letting go of everything to marry him?" Did she regret it? Ethan was the cause of her family's misery. Her father was hospitalized after suffering from a huge shock right after a car accident, while Olivia herself lost her darling child. Logically speaking, she should be regretting her decision, but when she closed her eyes, she would remember the shipwreck and the man who had rescued and dragged her back from the storm. He was the youngster she once met at school. She forced her tears at bay and said to Keith, "I don't." Keith watched her leave with mixed feelings, and the door closed with a click. When Olivia arrived at the hospital, Jeff was still in the ICU. She could only watch him from afar. The questions she had for him were lodged in her throat. In her memories, her father was a person who was both kind and humble. Before her parents' divorce, they never raised their voices at each other. He never remarried after Chloe left. All the spare time he had, he would spend it accompanying Olivia. Ethan kept mentioning her father, which meant the person he hated was not her. When they were still together, he had mentioned having a little sister that went missing. Her disappearance took a toll on his mother's mental health, which was why she stayed overseas all the time. What was the connection between his lost sister and her father then? Olivia decided it was best to start investigating those who worked for her father. She rushed off to find Harvey, her father's chauffeur, and Victor, their butler, at their respective homes. The two of them had worked for her father for many years. Strangely, one had gotten into an accident and the other had gone overseas, and she was unable to contact them. The only thing she knew now was that her father was still unconscious. She spent the day in a daze, not knowing what to do. Still, since things had come to this, the only explanation was that none of this was a coincidence. Clearly, someone had devised this. But Olivia was no fool. Since she did not manage to obtain any clues from her family's side, she shifted her target to Ethan's chauffeur, Kelvin, and his assistant, Brent. She checked her wristwatch for the time. It was only 7 in the morning, so they should be on the way to Ethan's place. Olivia dialed Brent's number. After some time, he answered the call and said in his usual polite tone, "Mrs. Miller." Olivia tried to suppress her bitterness when she heard him addressing her that way. "Mr. Ingram, I've made an appointment with Ethan to settle our divorce. Can you pick me up so we could go to the city hall together?" Brent fell silent. Just like Ethan, he did not like any sudden change of plans. Hastily, Olivia added, "Please don't misunderstand. I don't have other intentions. I'm just afraid that something might happen and stall us from getting divorced. I still haven't settled my father's medical bills." In truth, she was pretty close with them both. She was never rude to them, so when she spoke gently, Brent did not refuse. "Where are you, Mrs. Miller?" "I'll be right there." Olivia stated a location that was nearest to them. This place was along the road to Collington Cove, which was where Marina lived. Despite being reluctant to admit it, Ethan was caught spending the night here by the media multiple times. So, he must have been staying here when he and Olivia were apart a few months back. "Sorry, Mrs. Miller, but we're almost in Midvale. You'll have to wait for about 20 minutes. "Okay." Olivia was quite surprised. Midvale was somewhere near the Miller residence. Did Ethan not live with Marina? Olivia quickly dismissed the thought. Whether he stayed with Marina was none of her business. Kelvin drove fast, and they arrived in no time. As always, Brent opened the door for her. "Sorry for the wait, Mrs. Miller." Olivia nodded and got in the car. "No worries." Brent was a rather stoic person. Compared to him, Kelvin was livelier and more talkative. "Why didn't you sleep in, Mrs. Miller? It's so cold today." The sun isn't even up yet, Kelvin said. Brent shot daggers at Kelvin to shut him up. Olivia tried to exaggerate things by speaking slowly. Initially, I thought Ethan had a change of heart because of Marina. But now, it seems it's not just because of her. You two have been working with him for so long, so you should know something about his sister. The car came to an abrupt stop with a loud screech. Kelvin took his hands off the steering wheel and gestured to dismiss what she said. You can't just say things like that, Mrs. Miller. Calmly, Brent answered, Mrs. Miller, you know that we usually won't ask Mr. Miller about his personal matters. Even if we know something, we can't disclose anything to you. Please understand. Olivia covered part of her face with one hand. A tear slid down between her fingers as she said, I know I'm making things difficult for you too, but I have no choice. Ethan wouldn't tell me about it, and my dad is still unconscious after the surgery. My family has fallen into such a hopeless state, and I have no idea why. Even if I were to die, I'd want to know the truth. I don't want to suffer from ignorance every day. Mrs. Miller, what happened to Mr. Miller's sister is taboo. We don't know much about it. As if knowing that Olivia would continue asking them for help, Brent started writing an address on a piece of paper and passed it to her. Mrs. Miller, since we're friends, this is the most I can do to help you. Chapter 8. Olivia looked at the paper in her hand. It was the address of a cemetery. Was Ethan's sister dead? Even so, what did her father have to do with her death? If anyone were to know what kind of person her father was, it would be Olivia. And she knew he was not one to harm others, let alone a young woman. She knew that Brent and Kelvin would not disclose more information and decided to stop probing them. It was silent all the way to the Miller's residence. Olivia had mixed feelings when they arrived. Brent politely asked her, Mrs. Miller, would you like to go inside? No, thanks. I'll wait for him here. This was the final time she would meet him, and it was only to settle their divorce. She did not want to cause more trouble for herself. Besides, every single thing in there would remind her of their time together, and she refused to reminisce about the past. He was to blame for cherishing her so much back then. Even though he had become colder and more indifferent to her over time, she would never forget how kind and loving he had been. He should have been someone she hated to the core, but she could not find it in her heart to do so. The ignition was not turned off, and the inside of the car was warm and comfortable. She was the only one left in the car now. Her stomach started to hurt again, and she curled up into a fetal position and waited for the sky to brighten up. After that, she shifted into a position where she hugged her knees tightly to her chest. It was winter, so the days were short and the nights long. It was already 7 in the morning now, yet the sky was still rather dark. The leaves had fallen from the apple tree in the garden, making her thoughts drift off to sometime in the past. During the apple season, she yearned to have a taste of apple cider. Knowing this, Ethan helped to pick the fruits for her. Back then, the Ethan she knew was amiable and approachable. He was an excellent cook, and he spoiled her like a princess. As her thoughts wandered, she found herself walking alone toward the tree. It was still there, as it had been back then. But everything had changed, including the man she'd been with. Even the tree had changed, only a couple of dried leaves hung from the branches now. Its sorry state resembled her current relationship with Ethan. As Ethan walked out of the mansion, the same sight greeted him. A woman wearing a thin knitted shirt stood watching the apple tree from below. A gentle breeze blew, gently tousling her hair. The weather was way better today than the past few days. The first rays of the sun cast its glow on her face. Her fair skin glowed under it, making her look like a fairy who would vanish into thin air in the blink of an eye. Her hands were bandaged, but her countenance was pale, and she still wore the clothes she wore last night. Ethan. She did not look at him but was able to sense his presence. He hummed. Slowly, Olivia turned to face him. They stood close to each other, yet their hearts were far apart. I want to drink the apple cider you made one last time. Ethan was taken aback and took some time to respond. The apple season has passed. Stop wasting your time, he said, emotionless. Olivia's eyes looked a little puffy as she muttered, can you treat it as my last request before our divorce? She seemed to have changed a lot in just 3 months. He turned to look at the barren tree. In a slightly softer tone, he told her, "The frozen ones from last year aren't fresh. Let's see how it goes next year." Next year, Olivia brushed her fingers on the rough bark of the tree. She wouldn't be able to wait for another year. "You must hate me a lot, right?" "Yes. Then, will you be happy if I die?" She turned to face him and spoke softly. His heart skipped a beat at her words, and his thoughts became empty. For a moment, it felt like he had lost his mind. After some time, he recomposed himself and calmly said, "Fine. It's just some apple cider. Come on in." Olivia watched as he entered the house, the corner of her lips turning up into a smile. "Are you afraid of me dying?" she thought to herself. All of a sudden, she thought of taking revenge on him. She wondered what kind of expression he would wear when he received the news about her death one day. Would he be glad or upset? Ethan took out the box of frozen apples from the fridge to defrost. Olivia watched as he busied himself in the kitchen, thinking ruefully that this was probably the last time he would cook for her. At least it was something worth remembering. She crouched by the fireplace and started roasting marshmallows. The sweetness permeated the air, reminding her of how Ethan's grandmother would never fail to rush over when she smelled roasted marshmallows in the winter. The old lady treated Olivia really well, as if she were her own granddaughter. Sadly, she passed away 2 years ago. Ethan's grandfather then moved overseas to prevent himself from being constantly reminded of his loss. The once cozy mansion now stood cold and empty. Ethan's grandmother was no longer here to rob Olivia of her roasted marshmallows too, and that made Olivia feel empty inside. After finishing the roasted marshmallows and gulping down a glass of warm water, she felt that her stomach did not hurt as much as before. She could smell the pleasant scent of food from the kitchen. Olivia walked over to find Ethan pouring some of the soup into a thermos flask and into a bowl. Since when had she fallen from being his priority and one and only? She asked herself that question. Yet, she continued to turn a blind eye to the truth of their relationship by reminding herself of how sweet he was to her in the past. "The apple cider is ready," Ethan said, unaware of her dampening mood. "Thank you." Olivia stared at the mug in her hands. It tasted just the same as before, but she had already lost her appetite for it. "It's late. Let's head to the city hall." Ethan looked somewhat annoyed. "Aren't you going to drink it?" "I don't feel like it," Olivia said. Back then, he would have coaxed her with all the patience he had. Now, he simply glanced at her and poured the cider into the sink. His face was like a blank slate when he walked past her and said, "Let's go." "Send this to Collington Cove," Ethan said as he passed the thermos flask to Brent. "All right, Mr. Miller." It was at this moment that Olivia knew that there was nothing she could do to mend the tear in their relationship. The years she spent trying to fix things was nothing but a joke. Olivia quickly walked to the car. As she passed the apple tree, the wind blew, and the last leaves of the tree fell from its branches. Olivia raised a hand to catch one of the leaves. Softly, she said to herself, "What are you even holding on to?" Then she tossed it to the ground and crushed it beneath her feet. She closed the door of the car. Even though it was warm inside, just the way that she and Ethan sat at both ends of the passenger seat, like the North and South Poles, was enough to have the air feel as chilly as the weather outside. The journey to the city hall was smooth and without much traffic. It was as if God was paving the way for their divorce because the traffic lights were green all the way. As the car was taking a turn at the intersection, nearing their destination, Ethan's phone started ringing. Marina's voice came from the other end of the line. "Ethan, Connor's down with a fever. I didn't want to disturb you, but his fever is now at 103 degrees. I'm so scared. Hurry over. I'm coming." Ethan hung up, his eyes meeting Olivia's gaze. Her eyes were glassy, but the hatred in them was as clear as day. She spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "What's the child's name?" Chapter 9. It was dead silent in the car. Marina's voice was loud as she was anxious, so Olivia managed to hear her say the name, Connor. She remembered the day she received her pregnancy report. She had run into Ethan's embrace and told him about it. "Ethan, you're going to be a father. We're having a baby." Her voice was filled with enthusiasm. I've thought of our child's name. It'll be Colette if she's a girl and Connor if she's a boy. What do you think? Oh, how she wished she had misheard Marina, but Ethan looked her right in the eyes and told her, his name's Connor. You asshole. Olivia's hand was already in the air. She slapped him, yet he did not flinch, letting her do as she pleased. How could you name her child after our own? The thought of her child was Olivia's final straw. Tears streamed down her cheeks uncontrollably, and she pounced on him as if she had gone crazy. You devil! Why did God take away my child from me? Why weren't you the one who died? She landed hit after hit on him as she yelled, he doesn't deserve that name. Ethan grabbed both her hands and told Kelvin, head to Collington Cove. This made Olivia go berserk. We're close to the city hall already. Settle our divorce first before you head elsewhere. His fever won't go down. I must go back now. My father's lying unconscious in the hospital, yet the nurses wouldn't even let me anywhere near the hospital because of the bills. Are you saying that your child's life is important, but my father's life is nothing? Olivia yelled in his face. Ethan's face darkened at the mention of Olivia's father. How dare you compare your father to Connor? In a fit of rage, Olivia raised her hand to slap him again, but he gripped her wrist tightly. Are you done? He shouted. The car took a turn, and Olivia watched as they moved further and further away from the city hall. Ethan locked her tightly in his arms, restraining her movements and preventing her from struggling free. Long ago, she would be happy and content in his arms, but they were nothing more than shackles to her now. His arms were strong, and with how frail she was right now, she could not break free. Helpless, she hollered, do you love Marina that much? However, Ethan was stunned, for when he held Olivia, he found that she had not only gotten just a bit slimmer, she was way bonier than she was a year ago. She was paper thin, and he could feel her bones prodding him through her clothes. The woman he once pampered so much was now so skinny and frail. Was this truly what he wanted? He was just starting to doubt himself when the image of his sister's corpse flashed across his mind. His grip on Olivia's waist tightened a little. When he raised his head to look at her again, all that was left in his eyes was an endless pool of darkness. Believe it or not, I'll have someone remove your father's breathing tube right now if you continue making a fuss. Olivia fell silent then. Her hands clutched his clothes tightly as her tears soaked his shirt. It was funny how he was the one who used to say that he would never make her cry, but he was now the reason behind all her tears. The silence in the car was suffocating. Olivia finally managed to calm herself down, pushing him away before straightening her back. She then sniffed and said, it's your business if you want to go to your child. However, you can't ruin our plan. Stop worrying about me not letting you go because I'm going to divorce you no matter what. I don't have the habit of keeping someone else's trash. Ethan frowned at the word, trash, but Olivia ignored him and carried on with her speech. I admit that I've been too naive in the past to pin my hopes on you. I've seen everything now. Holding on is meaningless, so I'll let things go. Give me the money, and we'll deal with the formalities later on. I promise I'll be there in a call. I won't go back on my word. What if I don't want to? Olivia looked into his dark, unsettling eyes. The tears that she wept just now made her eyes clearer than ever. Coolly, she met his gaze and said, then I'll jump out of the car. I'd rather die if I couldn't save my father. Only then did Ethan take out a check and write on it. I'll wire you the other $5 million after we're divorced. Olivia laughed mockingly at him. Are you so afraid that I wouldn't divorce you? Don't worry. I'll sooner take my own life than stay beside a man like you. Stop the car. She grabbed the check from his hands, slammed the door shut, and left without looking back. Finally, she could save her father's life. She went to cash the check and rushed to the hospital to settle her father's medical fees. She then called a cab and headed to the address Brent had given her. It was a private, high-end cemetery. Those buried here were either affluent or filthy rich. Ethan's late grandma was buried here. Olivia bought a bouquet of his grandma's favorite bluebells. It was not long before she managed to find a grave that looked fairly new, which was surrounded by a circle of plum trees. The trees were full of flower buds that would bloom very soon. A name was carved on the gravestone, Leah Miller. Olivia knew Ethan adored his sister and that her going missing had been a topic of taboo to everyone around him. It was exactly why she did not know anything about his sister. Leah. Was this her name? Olivia had never heard of it. She crouched down to look at the photo on the gravestone. It looked like it was taken before she went missing when she was 5 or 6 years old. Her face was chubby and cute, and her eyes were somewhat similar to Ethan's. Olivia had no idea what she could use this information for. She took a picture of Leah's photo with her phone, considering it a clue. Then, she placed the bouquet of flowers that she had bought for Ethan's late grandmother, Eugenia Miller, on the ground. She knelt by the grave and started rambling. "Hi, Leah, I'm Olivia, your sister-in-law. Scratch that, it should be your ex-sister-in-law now. Sorry for meeting you in such a state. I promise I'll help you find the real culprit who did this to you." Olivia then went to Eugenia's grave, which was not too far away. In her photo, the old lady looked as amiable and kind as ever, her smile warm and comforting. Olivia fished out some roasted marshmallows from earlier in the morning and placed it in front of the grave. "Grandma, I'm here to visit you. It's winter now, but since you're no longer here to steal the marshmallows from me, they've all become tasteless." After standing for some time, Olivia started feeling tired, so she ended up sitting by the grave. It was as though Grandma was still alive, and Olivia was reminiscing with her. "Grandma, I'm sorry I couldn't keep the child. But that bastard Ethan has had 2 more children already. So, you don't have to worry about the bloodline anymore." Olivia continued, "He's changed. He's no longer the person I knew. Back then, he told me that he would defend me from anything and everything, but all the sufferings I face now are brought by him. If you were alive, you wouldn't let him treat me like this, right?" She forced a smile and said, "Ethan and I are getting divorced soon. You always said that if he wronged me, you'd crawl out from your coffin and kick his ass. My days are numbered, so I'm coming to find you soon. Then we can crawl out from the ground and kick his ass together. What do you say?" Once again, Olivia looked at the photo of the old lady with a kind smile. "What does it feel like to die? Is it dark? I'm scared of bugs that would bite me. What should I do? How about I bring you lots of flowers now, and you'll help me to chase the bugs away when I join you on the other side?" She looked up into the sky. "I miss you, Grandma." Chapter 10. Olivia stayed before the grave for quite some time before leaving. She did not have time to wallow in sorrow for too long. She had an investigation to carry out now that she had the photo. Most of the women her dad was in touch with worked in his company, so it was natural that Olivia started from there. But just as she started to search for a way to contact them, her phone started ringing. It was one of the children from the countryside whose education her father had sponsored back then. His voice was rather anxious. "Miss Fordham, I just returned from overseas and heard that Mr. Fordham is gravely ill. Is he all right? Thanks for your concern. My father's still getting treatment at the hospital. Gosh, how could someone as kind as him get into such a situation? If it wasn't for him sponsoring our studies years back, we wouldn't be where we are today." A thought flashed across Olivia's mind. In the past, her father had helped children in the countryside to move to the city for their studies, so Leah could have known him since she was abducted and taken to the countryside. "Ryan, do you know those who were sponsored by my father? I've been helping Mr. Fordham contact them all along. I know most of them, but I've lost contact with them after going abroad for the past few years. Is there anything I can help you with, Miss Fordham? I'll do everything in my power to help you." Olivia felt as though she just found herself a sliver of hope. Immediately, she told him, "I have a picture with me. Can you see if she's one of the students my father sponsored before?" "Sure thing, Miss Fordham." In just half an hour after sending him the picture, Ryan had sent Olivia the information she wanted. The girl in the picture he sent had bright eyes that were similar to Leah and Ethan. Her name was Jody, and she came from a poor family. Olivia's father had sponsored her education 12 years ago. She had been a brilliant student from a young age and managed to get a spot in many of the top universities in the nation, so she chose to further her studies in the country. Perhaps this was the person Olivia was looking for. In a hurry, she asked Ryan to meet up with her in a cafe. Ryan arrived on time. This was the first time in 10 years that Olivia met him in person. Back then, he was still a bashful boy, very unlike the smart-looking man in a suit who was the president of his own company sitting before her. Even though the Fordhams had fallen into bankruptcy, he still addressed her courteously. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Miss Fordham. I've only just arrived. I won't beat around the bush. Are you still in contact with Jody?" "I used to be. I seldom contacted my friends in the country when I stayed overseas. We haven't talked in at least 2 years. Do you know how she's doing these days?" "I've only just returned a few days ago. I wouldn't have known about your family's situation if it weren't for my friends. Jody and I aren't close, though. At most, I only contacted the others because of Mr. Fordham." Ryan took a sip from the cup of coffee and cleared his throat. "But since you requested it, I tried asking around in her circle. Sadly, she's dead. What a shame. Her grades were excellent, and she would have had a bright future ahead of her if she were alive." "How did she die?" "I'm not sure of the cause of her death, but I heard that she was fished out of the sea." Olivia frowned, her forehead wrinkling. Not only did she not find the answers she was looking for, but more questions also began to come up. Leia was kidnapped when she was almost 6 years old, so she should have remembered what had happened to her. If her father had sponsored her studies, why didn't she ask for help? Why did she not return to the Millers when she came to the city? Besides, what did Olivia's father have to do with Jody's death? Was my father kind to her? Olivia asked tentatively. Jody came from a poor background and was orphaned at a young age. She scored well in her exams and made her way into the city all alone. Mr. Fordham was very kind to her. I heard that she was rather reserved and was ostracized by her roommates, so Mr. Fordham rented her a small apartment so that she could excel in her studies, Ryan explained. Then, he set his cup down and asked, "Why are you so curious about her?" "I just want to find out the cause of her death so that she wouldn't die in vain," Olivia explained. She had planned to leave this world peacefully after getting $10 million from her divorce to settle her funeral. Now, she had something else in mind. She wanted to clear her father's name and take revenge for her family. Even if Ethan refused to tell her the truth, she would find it out herself. Ryan looked as if he suddenly recalled something. He took out a name card from his wallet and passed it to Olivia. "One of my friends is a renowned private detective. He could be of help if you wish to find out about anything." "Thank you, Ryan. No worries. I know Jody, and I wish for her to go peacefully too. I'll be staying in the country for some time, so just message me if you need anything. I have a meeting soon, so I'll be taking my leave. See you later." After seeing him off, Olivia called the private detective and sent the information she got over to him. Presently, she was in high spirits. When she arrived at the hospital, Dr. Freeman called her to his office. Olivia had an ominous feeling about this. Anxiously, she asked, "How's my father's condition? When can he wake up?" "Miss Fordham, you need to be mentally prepared. Even though Mr. Fordham's surgery was a success, he hit his head during the car crash, which triggered an aftereffect. He shows no signs of waking up, and he may not ever wake up again." Olivia thought her heart had fallen into a perpetual abyss. Her grip on the disposable paper cup loosened, and her hands started to tremble. Seeing her reaction, Dr. Freeman could not help but let out a sigh. "Don't lose hope. I'm just saying that it's a possibility. He should be fine if he wakes up by the end of this month." When she raised her head, Olivia's eyes were clouded with tears. She croaked, "He'll be in a coma if he can't wake up, right?" "Yes. So, I hope you'll be prepared for this and have things planned out." Dr. Freeman knew that it was not easy to earn money these days and that spending it on a person in comatose was not necessary. Olivia abruptly shot up from her seat and slammed her hands on the table. "No matter what happens, I won't give up on my father. I believe that miracles do happen." Then she dashed out of the office. She never thought that things would take a turn for the worse. If her father couldn't wake up, she'd never get to hear him speak the truth. If so, she could not die just yet. She rushed off to the oncology department. Keith had just finished diagnosing one of his patients when Olivia barged into the room. "Keith, help me." Keith looked at her anxious face and her hands that tugged at his sleeve. Olivia spoke calmly and firmly as though she had found her salvation. "Be it chemotherapy or surgery, I'll do anything as long as I can have more time to live. Only by living would she have the time to find out the truth and accompany her father for a longer time." Keith did not understand what she had been through, but as long as she had the will to live, he, as a doctor, was positively delighted. "All right, I'll arrange your first chemotherapy session right away."